So, welcome to Gaule's Question Time again, where I speak to some really interesting people about how tech is changing business. And today we're with Josh Lawman. Hi, Josh.
Hi, Andrew. Thank you for having me on.
Great. Well, good to have you. We know each other through sort of the Oxford AI and startup sort of ecosystem, and real pleasure to have you with us today. If you could kick off, give us an introduction to yourself and your background, please.
Yeah, and I remember unusually our very first meeting at the OxGen, the first Oxford Generative AI Summit a number of years ago. You're showing me a Hey Gen video, I think, in the early days
Yeah,
of.
and this is me this time, not my AI agent
Yes.
from 2 years ago. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so about myself, I'm AI engineer building AI products for clients. My background's in data science and traditional machine learning, and I started off in ad tech and marketing, trying to replicate what analysts were doing and how they were looking at campaigns, but back then just with traditional regression algorithms and things like that. And I've moved into everything AI and LLMs and enjoying most of all the interplay between the traditional algorithms we had and all the new models that we have accessible to us. So yeah, currently working on a variety of client projects, helping them build AI into their company's workflows or productize the knowledge work that they already they have that they would like to have externally available.
yeah. Great, great. Yeah, and I think we've got complementary sort of experiences in that. I've got 15, 20 plus years in terms of how tech is changing business models and sort of stuff like that. So yeah, I recall as well going back to the machine learning sort of type days and sort of thinking,
Mm.
oh yeah, this is changing. But we're now really seeing the tech and the capabilities and the power of these of the back ends now, and that really stepping forward, aren't we? So, where do you think organizations are in their implementation of AI? What's your overview of the sort of organizations you're coming across at the moment?
Well, I feel like we're all very much beginners and it's really painfully obvious. I feel like no matter how much time, if you spend all day, every day thinking about LLMs and AI, or if you're just, tuned in over this Christmas break and set up an open claw and have playing with that, I think we're all repeatedly beginners because we see new models and new things being delivered. And so I think mostly companies are completely under leveraging the technology that's available and workers as well. Um, it's, I think, a continual almost like frustrating experience to find this tool that feels so powerful and you feel like if you knew all the ways to piece it together that would be able to do so much more, and then the barrier of the bar of what you could be doing with it keeps growing. So yeah, I think we're under leveraging it a lot. Back in the data science days, I felt like every company was under leveraging traditional algorithms, machine learning algorithms, and in some ways this is more complex and also and more unknown and changing even faster. We also don't have a whole swarm of people who have been trained in it. Like with data science, we had mathematicians, physicists who were used to these regression algorithms or these other concepts. So yeah, I think we're under leveraging it as a collective.
Yeah, yeah, and I suppose for me, my experience from when I had that wow moment when I saw the OpenAI GPT and that sort of came out, and we'd been waiting, we'd been through that machine learning sort of type stuff, but when we saw that we put those prompts in and then we got the text and we just started getting those images that weren't quite right, or as you sort of
Yep.
experienced the Hey Gen sort of type stuff with avatars going back a couple of years ago. I suppose from my experience, I was trying to keep up with that tech
Mm,
probably up until about the summer of last year, 2025. And I felt, no, the tech now is good enough and can cope with an awful lot of stuff. And it's just the businesses aren't there yet. And some awareness you need because you can't have that sort of innovator's dilemma. If you don't know or experience that sort of stuff,
mm.
right, you can't sort of innovate. But I think we've now passed that sort of point. Are you finding that now with some of the organizations you're working that they're wowed when you try some of these implementations?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think one of the problems is it's very easy to be wowed by by lots of things because there's so many new things that are happening all the time. I definitely think organizations are being wowed sometimes by the right thing, sometimes by the wrong thing, because your imagination can kind of get ahead of yourself. If you see an employee put together some slide deck that looks really good, you kind of have these other cluster of skills that you imagine that they can do. And sometimes the AI can do those adjacent skills and sometimes they can't. And so if they've not got the intuitions around AI, if they've not been didn't have that wow moment back when ChatGPT came out, but are having the wow moment now, I think it's a little bit more complex to navigate what the AI is good at and what it isn't good at doing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and I'm finding as well. I've come across a number of people. I was running in 2023 and 2024, running workshops to show people the
mm,
text, the images, the audio, and sort of stuff like that. And now I suppose I've got to the beginning of last year. So, oh, we're doing AI, they would say, and they just had Copilot installed just to write fancy emails or to be able to read their emails. What's your reaction
yeah,
to that when organizations say, yeah, we're doing AI and they've just installed Copilot on their emails? What's your view on that?
yeah, no, I definitely am seeing that it seems that in this sort of overwhelming sea of possibilities, the sort of enterprise solution of just buy the Microsoft implementation of it and deploy that and translate maybe the idea of ChatGPT into an enterprise setting where you can chat with this AI worker or this AI chatbot and it has some information. It feels like it's really not seeing the fundamental change that's happening for organizations or that could be happening and not having intuitions about what this new technology is. I feel like we're really stuck in the past. And part of it is just it's been only a few years or a few months in the case of some technologies. But yeah, it feels to me a very dated paradigm. It's very painful, actually, if it's just a matter of we've adopted Copilot and we chat with it and things like that. Um,
So, can you give us some examples of organizations and implementations you've worked on where you've implemented it, analyzing documents, being able to do the work that people can't sort of do? Give us some examples if you wouldn't mind. Kind of.
Yeah, so one example is to do with analyzing financial data and understanding bank statements from businesses and how the new prospective clients are operating their business so that they can be better understood right away. And the kind of chat approach that is tempting to use doesn't take advantage of the language model. So we've built some custom steps to dig into the data using sort of like traditional heuristics and statistics to understand what's going on, and then allowing the language models to sift through that and sift through what's available to surface the most interesting information. And in that case, what was really striking was the impact of talking to especially the most like expert users, most expert technicians who would usually do this investigation themselves and what they would be looking for and embedding a lot of those heuristics and encouraging the LM to think along the same lines the person did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's bringing in data and it's bringing in some of the knowledge or the questions that the people and
Yes.
want to get under, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's something people aren't quite realizing that you can do is you can actually get the AI to help extract the information from yourself and how you think. Someone explained it to me this way a while back, which was this idea of, early on we wanted to try to make the LLMs more legible. We wanted to get information out of the LLMs that we could use, and now there's this real challenge to making yourself and your organization more legible and understandable to the LLMs and the AI systems. If you can codify what you know in docs of how you work, your brand guidelines, the way you write emails, if you can give examples and try to make it so that it's not just having to shoot from the hip or make assumptions about how your organization works, I think you can get a massively better results. And surprisingly, the AI can actually help you along with that um, and help you extract and create the documents. But you need to kind of give it that opportunity rather than just say, "Oh, magic genie, write a document," and just
Yeah,
assume
yeah.
that.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
yeah, I think you're right. I think that is an important point around giving the AI the context and giving
yeah,
it some data. It wows you in what you do. The example you just give, actually, I did a personal thing about 3 or 4 weekends ago.
mm,
Usually, oh, I've got to sort my house accounts out and sort out my daughters for university and getting some money off to them or whatever. And I thought, well, okay, I just scanned 12 months worth of my bank accounts.
mm,
I took the PDFs from my bank account, just put those 12 into Claude, and asked it to do an analysis of it, and it was amazing. It produced a fantastic Excel spreadsheet with multiple tabs, and summarized where the key expenses were and sort of stuff like that. And it was like, wow, if I'd been skimming through those and trying to find out, well, how much had I spent on electricity? How much had I spent on mortgage? How much had I spent on
Yeah.
my daughter's university sort of subs? It was just within 15 minutes, I had this fantastic sort of sheet and could dive into it. And as you said, then it came back and was asking me, well, would you like to know more information about such and such? And
Yeah.
and would you like me to prioritize them, green, amber, red? And it was just like, wow, such an
Yeah. I
awesome.
think there's a lot of those wow moments with Claude Cowork, and especially when um, people, yeah, start to create creative like that of piecing together. Oh, well, if it had this data available to add this context, it would probably be able to solve this problem. One of my clients that has started to use Cowork internally have sort of had their mind blown repeatedly of here's something I did and then something else that another very high level employee has done, and they would have usually had to take so much more time with these things.
Yeah,
But it's difficult because you in some ways need that expertise to even understand not just what the context was, but how the problem should be framed. So I imagine in your prompting of Cowork, you had some idea of and some clear idea of what you wanted, and that enabled the sort of like very powerful result. Although
yeah,
there's a
yeah,
lot of powerful results out of the box, to be fair.
yeah. I suppose taking it the next step with organizations I'm working with around their strategy of implementation and change, because over the years I've worked from, going back in the early days of enterprise resource planning, ERP systems, SAP, which was like, a very structured process, which you then forced onto a company. I think with AI now, you've got to have that bit connecting to what you're saying. You need to understand some of the things that you within your process, but also you've got to take a bit of a step forward on how things might change with AI. Now, I know you've worked with some companies where you've done more about their process in sales or bookings.
Mhm.
Could you give a bit more of an example of that, of those types of implementations?
Yeah, so one of my clients is wanting to automate online bookings, especially in this case for MOTs and garage repair, for car repair, and trying to understand. They're already missing calls in that case, both out of hours and then even some calls during office hours. And the front office staff have a very challenging job where they have to juggle a lot of hats. They have to a lot of do things internally, as well as someone can walk in the door and all sorts of things can happen. And the client is looking at the business and I think has a really keen eye for how things are starting to change and seeing the discrete pieces of work that you don't need a person to do, and then trying to distinguish those between to the ones that you do need a human. And so one of the things we've started with is just the fact that all of those missed calls, and how can we capture them? Can we have people do the bookings online and have a better experience than just the current baseline, which is if they miss a call, they get through to the voicemail, and very few people leave a voicemail, and it's not a great experience. And so um, the the real benefit we have is that a lot of these organizations already have a lot of data that's readily available. So I think for data science, data engineering has always like been a problem if you don't have the well-structured data, and if things aren't structured well internally. But a lot of companies are already using tools, CRMs that have APIs that basically you can hook these AI systems into and pull out the data that you need. So if you need an online booking system that sees if there's any available slots and you're using a popular tool, it's very likely that that tool exposes the information in some way for someone who's wanting to build technically with it. And I think it's a real juggling act between saying, oh, we can replace all the people and we can do this thing entirely with AI, to say, no, no, here's the discrete tasks that AI are very good at, that that would actually be a better experience for the person in the case of calling out of hours, and you still get at least something answering the phone. And if you want to book an MOT, for myself, I'd feel, I can make the decision, do I want to call back in the morning or do I just want to book it right there with the AI? Yeah, so I think there's lots of challenges because the kinds of things that AI is good at is not always clear, and sometimes and very custom to the business needs. So I think you need that sort of insight into the business, and how the business process will change, as well as the technology and some deep intuitions
Yeah.
about how you can actually leverage them.
Yeah, yeah, and I've worked on projects similar to what you're talking about there, and I think my perspective now, it's not about AI replacing or
Mm,
removing the workers. What I'm finding is that the AI is good at doing things that people are not good at and doing them at a time and cost that people are not good at. So,
Hmm.
as you said, the example there of the AI being able to analyze the data, check check a booking sort of system, be able to answer the phone on a Friday evening when you
Yeah.
discover, oh, my MOT needs to be done next week, calling, so and then being able to answer that. And instead of you having to go to the website and click in and all the rest, just
Hmm.
phoning up and then the answer and the response. And also that the AI, if it's a more interactive sort of type discussion, um, maybe not so much in the MOT example, but in another example, say, well, I'm phoning up to do a dental appointment, for example, and sort of say, oh yeah, I need to go and book in for a routine checkup, and you mention to the AI, oh by the way, I'd also like to maybe check out about teeth whitening. Even if a human answered that call, that human probably wouldn't remember it, probably
Mm.
wouldn't put it in the CRM system, probably would want to say,
Yep.
oh, yeah, by the way, let's book you in for that as well, or I'll book you in for a different time. But because you've recorded that call, as all the telephone systems now record it for training purposes and all of
Hmm.
that, your AI can go back and check that thing, which would have been too costly for people to listen back over hundreds of hours of calls. The AI now remembers it and the AI now records it, right? It's
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. I think thinking about those moments where it would have been too costly, like there's a whole category of activities we've ruled out because it'd be too expensive. It'd be ludicrous to have employees do something, but now we have to be a bit more creative of the things we would do if you had labored a fraction of the cost. Um, with that client as a kind of fun point, and one of the things they want to do is also have the outbound agent make or the agent make phone calls out to book parts for the repaired cars so that they can make it a bit more streamlined. And again, the agent doesn't mind if it's going to call, 20 times and they're busy, and it only gets through on the
yeah,
20th time. If that vendor picks up eventually and it can make the call. No, yeah, I think there's amazing possibilities. I think one things that I'm seeing organizations, especially larger ones, have a challenge solving is the education piece and how you have this kind of go throughout organizations. So I'm seeing a lot of like workshops happening, and I think there's going to be a need for a lot more workshops, um, both on the business side as well as the for technical people, because the ways of working is just changing in quite a fundamental way, and not everyone um, learns in the same way. And we're kind of requiring everyone to just go out and be obsessed with Hey Gen and try ChatGPT and try all of these things. And it's sort of impossible. And there's a whole sea of influencers looking to get your attention and say, look at this. Oh, wow, your life will completely change once you try this tool. And it's difficult, I think, to find a trusted pair of hands that can help. Um,
yeah,
or at least the organizations I'm talking to, it's hard to find that
yeah,
because
yeah. Yeah, I think where, as I said earlier, but for the first couple of years, I was more doing the hands-on,
mm,
getting people to understand the tools. Now I'm running programs at Henley Business School, which are around the strategy and implementation of AI, which are for that sort of senior executive level, for them to understand how what we just talked about, how the processes are going to change and how AI workers are going to come in to supplement what their team members do, but also how the business model could change within within particular industries. So we've done cases with Henley Business School and Henley Business Angels, our investment group, where we sort of say, right, instead of humans having to review lots of pitch decks and investment
mm,
documents and that coming in, the AI can now analyze those, and the AI can very very quickly see, does it meet the criteria, right?
mm,
Is the startup in a particular geographical area? Is the startup
mm,
looking for the right amount of investment? Do they have particular tax requirements and sort of stuff like that? Those are pretty objective type things. And it can also look at some subjective type things like, well, what's the competitor analysis? This entrepreneur has said they're better than company A, B, or C, but when the AI looks at it, And just when I do Google searches and when I do
Mm.
the human bit of doing that, it also finds out, oh, but they didn't mention company D, E, and F, which might enter that market or might already be,
Mm.
So I think AI's got a great potential in doing that. But if that AI worker can then also make the cost of doing the analysis lower,
Hmm.
and it could start investing at a cheaper rate, at a lower rate, and change the whole business model within an industry. So I think organizations have to think about that AI worker process and then the business model changing in a
Yeah.
sector. You're seeing similar.
Yeah, and I love that use case and that program. I think that sort of program is going to be increasingly more essential for businesses to do. But that use case I love, and back to our original Copilot discussion of a shifting kind of way of approaching things. So I think what I'm seeing a lot with organizations that are just trying to apply the ChatGPT model internally with something like Copilot is they would take some use case like that, which I think is incredible, and say, we've created a chatbot where we can drag in our slide decks and it will analyze them and give us feedback. But they're not thinking in terms of, well, we now have this tool called the LLM, which can do a very incredible discrete unit of work to analyze any document we get. And let's create some sort of dashboard or a flow where you can upload 100 PDFs and you can have a bunch of true false flags come out according to criteria that an expert like yourself would think through after interviewing you and understanding how you look at slide decks and what you look for, which things could be true false, which things should be categories, which things should be scored. What tasks require deep research after you've to confirm, like you said, the competitor analysis. And I think the next wave of tools beyond Copilot will be this wave where we're not just thinking in terms of, oh, there's this other person on the line that I can chat with, which is like a nice experience, but I can split up, 10 little worker ants to go review this slide deck with 10 different perspectives. And then I can have the information come back in a very excellent condensed way where because I've separated those discrete tasks, I can also have an increase in reliability. So instead of just saying, well, the AI and speed, and so I can suddenly scan a whole, summary of all of these and then filter by the ones that have well-researched competitors that are in the regions, like you said, and all of that structured information now makes it a lot more usable to my organization, especially if I'm looking to scale beyond just I want to analyze this PDF or and with your example of the
Yeah.
the financial analysis is, I think, the same thing there.
And I think the example we've seen when we've shown this sort of application and that to larger funds
Mm.
and challenged them and sort of said, look, instead of making one £5 million investment, make 50 £100,000 investments at an earlier stage. Your AI, our AI, could then monitor and support where you've done those investments because we know from the Oxford startup huddle that it's one, two, three people in a startup who haven't got all the experience, haven't got all the contacts.
Mhm.
Now, if our AI investment process has invested in that business, they've then got the knowledge of all of the other businesses we've invested in and all of the knowledge of our team to be
Mm.
able to say, oh, you're now hitting this growth point where you want to enter a new market, want to go to the US. Oh, by the way, we helped Josh to do that 3 years
Mhm.
ago, and here's a contact and here's knowledge in that for you, which humans would have been too expensive and they would have
Yeah.
too narrow knowledge and they wouldn't have the time and they wouldn't have the memory to be able to do that. And that's where I get so excited about, look, this can really change how organizations work and improve productivity and all of that. And people will be
Yeah,
a lot
that's
better
amazing.
in that for it. It's so
Yeah, no, yeah.
go on.
Oh no, that's amazing. I think that's exactly it. And that's seeing one of those use cases where there's just a completely new opportunity that you would never have been able to do either because humans were too limited or because it wouldn't have been cost efficient. And so the companies I think that can do that are going to be extremely successful.
Yeah. I want to explore a bit further out. When we touched on that example of the AI being able to answer the calls and the AI
Mm.
being able to book things in, one of the things that I'm raising at this workshop we're doing at Henley is sort of saying, look, okay, well, okay, if you're convinced now you can have an AI system that can go out and do these things and an AI system
Mm.
that can respond, imagine the case like the MOT example. Humans would have probably only, when I go have my car tires, MOT or whatever like that, I might call two or three
Mhm.
garages, get a price, see their availability, then balance, well, do I want the hassle of getting the bus
Mm.
there or dropping the
Mhm.
car off, getting the bus back, and sort of stuff like that? And it's probably only two or three interactions. But if my AI agent now can automatically go to 20 different garages,
Mm.
say, because I've set parameters saying it's within a 5-10 mile radius, and my AI is making calls to those sites or going onto the websites and sort of stuff like
Mhm.
that, don't we think that those garages will have to have AI? Because otherwise, they're going to have my agents calling them up, and the human's going to have to answer the call. So we are going to have these scenarios, and in normal day-to-day stuff, garages, nail bars,
Mm.
hairdressers, whatever, right? Those places where you have that sort of interaction. Where do you think we're going to go when agents are talking to agents in a B2C environment like that, or in a business to business environment where we automate those things? Where do you think we're going to end up? I don't know the answer, but I'd be interested in your thoughts.
Yeah. No, I mean, from a technical perspective, it is very funny and like absurd because I think we are going that direction. Right now, in that outbound ordering case, actually, we're relying on the human intelligence on the other side as well to help us. And if they expose an agent, you have new error states that we'd have to consider. But sorry, to not get um, too down the weeds, I think in a normal use case with technology, you would have, APIs or ways that they could interact automatically. We talk about like MCP and things like that. So instead of everyone having a website, everyone having some sort of, MCP that's available that an agent can connect to, or it actually doesn't even need to be an MCP server. It could just be things like the LLMs.txt. So a lot of documentation pages are exposing a sort of like a version of their website for language models to read. And so you could have that where it becomes a new web standard where instead of getting all of these phone calls, your website is more friendly, but for the AIs to parse. But I mean, to be honest, I don't really know where we're going with that. But I do see that there's going to be a growing distance in companies that are operating with an older mindset and just using human labor in the way that we have, and companies that are figuring out the tasks. I think the booking the MOT from the user perspective is also an amazing use case where you could call 20 MOTs, either look up on the website, and if they don't have the pricing on the website, call them. And to me, all of that comes back to the real is if you could really have it understand what your preferences were. So which bus lines you would be happy to take, or your friend that lives over this, part of town, so you'd be happy to have a tea with them at the same time as the MOT, or well, actually that would be a bit of a long tea. But basically there's going to be a lot of a challenge of trying to understand how do we extract data from ourselves, from our organizations, so that these tools can actually operate in an efficient way rather than them having blind spots that they will have by default because they don't know us. I think we
Yeah,
benefit from a lot of the assumptions they make. If I'm speaking to it in English, it assumes that I want to keep speaking English, and I appreciate that I don't have to tell it
yeah,
that. But then there are other assumptions it has to make that are hidden and could kind of trip me up
yeah,
if I'm not
yeah.
aware of them.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point though. But for me, who's been using now GPT, but also using
Mm,
Claude and sort of stuff like that, and using projects and using particular,
mm,
creating some prompts that I frequently use. After using it for 2 years plus and that now, the system does remember and does know the sort of things that I've forgotten and put in. So I agree with your point there that in the example we just talked about, there are some cases there with yes, this bus route is better than this, and yes, I could
mm,
also do some shopping at the same time that I'm there.
mm,
But also, I'm also finding now when I'm interacting with the AI on sort of projects, it's bringing back things into memory that I'd forgotten, or it's creating
mm,
connections. So just like that investment sort of type example, you know, it'll bring back things that I'd forgotten, or I didn't know, or my co-worker and that, or my family
mhm.
and that is using. So I think there's going to be things here that's going to change some of the mindset that it's not just about me personally. I think the AI does become a bit more of an assistant, an associate, a friend, or something like that. People would start considering it, which is different, isn't it?
Yeah, I think those cumulative benefits, yeah, definitely will build up. And I think one where I see organizations struggling as well is how do you take that someone who's got deep intuitions about how to use these tools or has been using them like yourself for a couple of years? And how do you translate to that to the wide range of people at your organization and get it so that the new hire, maybe the new grad or from another company that wasn't allowed to use any AI in their company, how do you get them to use it in a similar way? And I think that's very, very difficult to do. But I think that, and I think it's going to be one of the ongoing challenges is how do you get this sort of like top performing segment and way of using this tool and have that dispersed throughout your organization?
Yeah. And there's been some studies on that, right, hasn't it? That
Mm,
that individuals that aren't necessarily so productive have now been enhanced by the sort of
mm,
AI, and I think also that that spreading of the knowledge is really important. But I'm still a very big believer that the AI now is going to increase the quality and the quantity of the work that sort of people do. So just in
mhm,
this example of the podcast, right? I've been
mm,
doing podcasts now for 15 years, done over, probably need a 400 podcasts now. When I first started, I'd physically be with you and I'd have a dictaphone and then
mm,
somebody would have to type up after listening to the audio. Now the AI analyzes the transcript, creates the full document, creates short bits,
mm.
create some video snippets and sort of stuff like that. It's probably still taking me about the same amount of time as I used to do before, but the quality and quantity of the output is
Mm.
now considerably higher. And just going back to previous examples, right, of analyzing bank statements, it's like, okay, well, I would have done that job before, and it probably still would have taken me an hour or two to skim down and
Yeah.
write some notes along the side. But now I get a much quality output, which hopefully is going to give me better outcomes and all of that, whether that's in personal life, business life, or sort of stuff like that, right? Isn't it?
Yeah. No, I think that's right. And I think some of it is surprisingly transferable as well. So again, going back to that analysis example that you've done, companies that realize that they could do that and that lots of employees are having to do that kind of task can try to capture that inside a skill or inside a certain way of using these tools. And I think um, that's it's also surprising to see that someone can have a way of doing things that usually I would have to watch over your shoulder to understand, okay, how did you go through the bank statements? How did you do this or that? And you could develop some sort of skill and help me replicate a similar experience, not to the same level, if but using the kind of language that you would use as an expert to talk about the financial analysis.
Mm.
Um, I think that's another thing people are sometimes stumbling across by accident is the benefit of using their domain expertise in when they're talking to these AI products. If you use insider language, so to speak, the AI responds in a different way. So if I then if you're just using if I say make me a website, for example,
Mm-hmm.
it's going to go with all the baseline assumptions that it has kind of baked in. But if you ask make me a Next.js website deployed on Vercel using Postgres database on the back end, if those were in line with its assumptions, it will just do the exact same thing. But if you're there's like I'm kind of muddling this point. Basically, when you push towards like some technical language, whether it's like technical from a programming perspective or from a business perspective, the sort of expert terminology can help steer it towards ways that give you a completely different result. And that can be captured in the skills, I think, itself that you build from your organization.
Yeah. Josh, it's been fascinating again talking with you. It's great to sort of share this
Likewise.
with our viewers and sort of listeners. And going through the journey we've been on with AI, going through on the examples and that you've given and I've sort of
Mm,
given in terms of how this stuff is being applied now. Try to think a bit about how the future is going to be because we're on that
mm,
edge, right, aren't we? And it's like I don't know where some of these things are going to go. I suppose I've put after going through the .com era, going through the
mm.
1990s and the early sort of 2000s where the internet is. My feeling going back when I first saw GPT, we were in the mid 1999s, not 1990s. I feel we're about 2001 sort of now
Okay.
in terms of where AI is. I don't feel we've yet had like the iPhone moment where the
Mm,
internet is there on a mobile device and is moving around. So
mhm.
I still don't feel that it's there really embedded yet. That there might be some use cases, but I don't feel it's ubiquitous everywhere. And I think there's another whole step going to come when AI is embedded in physical things and robotics and stuff like that. And I've
Yeah.
done quite a
I'm
bit of
curious.
traveling in China, and I'm seeing more stuff there where they're applying this
Hmm.
stuff. Yeah.
I'm curious from your perspective with the .com, with all the hype there, that people adding .com to their businesses to get higher valuations. Now everyone adding .ai and positioning themselves as an AI expert. Do you think, how much do you think the hype parallels transfer or don't from this era, from the
Yeah.
.com era?
Yeah. No, good question. I think, um, I think it was a bit about all this internet thing and the .com sort of stuff that everybody was creating websites for, you know,
Mm,
dog grooming or for things, and then the internet sort of just was, that's the back end. It was the functionality bit, right? So I when I first showed, I was trying to show Netscape and Mosaic to the corporate that I was working in at the time.
mm.
And they were saying, "Oh no, people online are weird. We're not going to sell direct to customers." And I was showing them Jeff Bezos and Amazon and selling books online.
Wow.
Well, yeah, but we don't sell books, and books is what they sort of sell, right? But it probably took, Amazon 10 years or whatever to become the ubiquitous retailer.
Mm,
And yes, they use the internet, but now that's all there. And I think we haven't gone through that AI fears at the moment.
hmm.
We're still there about which, as we've done on this podcast discussion now,
Yeah.
it's all about AI, right? But what it's going to move to is my customers want to have calls on a Friday evening. They want the things to
Mm,
be answered there and then. They want expertise. They want to be able to
mm,
have their health issue discussed or their car issue discussed. So just like, oh, I'm coming in for the MOT, but by the way, I've also got a knock banging sort of sound, and
hmm.
I end up with a bit of oil on my drive. What could it be? And the AI could be answering back and so, well, can you check your dipstick? Or yes, bring
Hmm.
that in, would also check that at the same time, right? That's the AI is just going to get lost in the background of it. So I think we're going to
Hmm.
go through that phase, um, and and business processes are going to change with AI. But I think
Do you
with
think people are going to
God,
get disillusioned first? Do you think people are going to go through some sort of disillusion first, or is it there's so much momentum with the new technologies that it will look different?
yeah, we're going to have some companies drop off. We're going to have some that where the use cases that just aren't right. But my feeling is this is going faster, is more impactful,
Mm,
um, and is going to change business models more fundamentally than the .com bit did.
yeah.
And I say I'm predicting some more changes when AI gets embedded more into physical sort of type
Mm,
things, and as it changes the business processes. So I think we're in that changing business process phase at the moment, as we've discussed through a lot of
yeah.
this discussion. It's okay now. It can do analysis. Now it can do things that people couldn't do. Da, 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 and
Yeah.
it'll do that. White collar worker sort of type job. But as we said, I don't think white collar workers are going to be out of jobs. They're going to have
Mm,
more jobs doing added value stuff, or partly cleaning up the mess that the AI does because it wasn't implemented properly, or whatever like that. But
yeah.
I do feel that there is another wave coming, which is going to be 5 years off or sort of something like that. Again, from what I'm seeing in China,
Yeah.
where their culture and their approach is to apply this stuff a lot
Mm.
more. And back to the .com example, there was, there were, I forget who said it back, after a few years of the .com. It said, we did all this investment, and what did I get? 180 characters on Twitter as the sort of thing, right? It was that, oh, we did all this social media stuff and whatever like
Mm.
that. But I think AI is going to be more fundamental than just a
Yeah.
chatbot you want to chat to and be a friend to.
I like the fundamental, like the use of the word fundamental change because it that's what it does feel like is that the skill mix that you'll be hiring for will be different. The way that you'll organize teams will be different. How much it makes sense to have people working together versus as individuals. It's all changing and it's really difficult to see how it's going to shake out. But the Copilot implementation of that feels like it's completely missing it and just saying, oh, it's basically fancy Google we have now,
Yeah, yeah,
or it's, something like that. So I think,
yeah, yeah.
no, excited to see that.
No, Josh, we've had a fascinating discussion. Thank you for running through all of that. We're going to be at Oxtech Week in Oxford on the 26th, 27th of May. I'm doing a slot on the one of the afternoons and that there. You're speaking as well. When are you doing? What are you doing?
I'm not sure the exact day, but yeah, I'll be speaking, I believe, about for small businesses, medium-sized businesses implementing AI and a bit more from the technical side of things.
Great. All right. So people can meet us in person in May in Oxford if they want to come along. So thanks so much, Josh. Been a pleasure chatting with you. Thank you.
Lovely to chat. Bye.